So they tore her backpack apart in front of the entire cafeteria, laughing as her belongings scattered across the floor like confetti. But they had no idea she was a third-degree black belt who could drop a grown man in under 3 seconds. What happened next would become legendary at Westfield High, the kind of story that gets whispered about for years after graduation, passed down from older siblings to younger ones, like a cautionary tale about never judging someone by their appearance. The incident that would change everything started on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday morning in October. The autumn leaves were just beginning to turn golden outside the tall windows of Westfield High's main corridor, and students were shuffling between classes with the usual mix of excitement and exhaustion that comes with being halfway through the semester. The hallways buzzed with the typical teenage energy, friends catching up on weekend drama, couples holding hands between lockers, and the ever-present sound of sneakers squeaking against polished linoleum floors. Nobody paid much attention to the slight figure walking quietly along the edge of the crowd, staying close to the wall as if trying to become part of the architecture itself. She moved with an almost ethereal grace, each step deliberate yet silent, her dark hair falling like a curtain across half her face as she kept her eyes fixed firmly on the ground ahead of her. To the casual observer, she looked exactly like what everyone assumed she was. Just another shy new girl trying desperately not to draw attention to herself in the complex social ecosystem of high school politics. Her name was Keiko Nakamura, though most students at Westfield couldn't even pronounce it correctly, settling instead for awkward approximations or simply avoiding her name altogether. She had transferred to this suburban Colorado school just 6 weeks earlier when her mother accepted a position as head pediatric surgeon at the regional medical center, leaving behind everything familiar in their previous life in San Francisco. The transition had been jarring in ways that went far beyond the typical challenges of being the new kid, from the diverse, multicultural environment of her previous school to the overwhelmingly homogeneous halls of Westfield High, where her Japanese heritage made her stand out like a single dark brushstroke on a canvas of beige. At 17, Keiko possessed the kind of understated beauty that could easily be overlooked if you weren't paying attention. Delicate features that seemed almost porcelain in their perfection, almond-shaped eyes that held depths most people never bothered to explore, and a petite frame that made her appear fragile, vulnerable, like something that might break if handled too roughly. She dressed in muted colors that seemed designed to help her fade into the background, soft grays, pale blues, and earth tones that whispered rather than shouted. Her clothes were always perfectly clean and pressed, but they hung on her small frame in a way that suggested she was still growing into them, or perhaps that she preferred the comfort of oversized garments that could serve as a shield against unwanted attention. What made the situation even more tragic was how desperately Keiko wanted to fit in, to find her place in this new world that felt so foreign and intimidating. She would sit alone at lunch, pretending to be absorbed in a book while secretly watching the easy camaraderie of established friend groups, longing to be part of something bigger than herself. During group projects, she would hover hopefully at the edges of forming teams, her intelligent contributions often overlooked in favor of louder, more confident voices. Teachers appreciated her quiet diligence and consistently excellent work, but even their praise felt somehow isolating, marking her as different in a school culture that seemed to value social connection over academic achievement. The cruel irony that none of her classmates could have possibly known was that this seemingly fragile, timid girl carried within herself a reservoir of strength and skill that would have shocked them into silence. The truth about Keiko Nakamura was hidden beneath layers of careful camouflage and deliberate misdirection. While her classmates saw a fragile flower wilting under the harsh fluorescent lights of Westfield High, the reality was that she possessed a level of physical prowess that would have left even the school's star athletes speechless with amazement. Her petite 5'2" frame, which appeared so delicate in her oversized sweaters and loose-fitting jeans, was actually a masterpiece of controlled power. Every muscle fiber honed through years of rigorous training, every movement a testament to discipline that most teenagers couldn't even comprehend. Keiko had been practicing judo since she was 4 years old, following in the footsteps of a family tradition that stretched back 3 generations. Her grandfather, Keiko Nakamura, had been a legendary judoka in Japan before immigrating to America in the 1960s, carrying with him not just his belongings, but an ancient philosophy about the way of gentle combat that emphasized using an opponent's strength against them. Her father, though he had chosen the path of engineering over martial arts, had ensured that both Keiko and her older brother understood the importance of their heritage, spending countless evenings in their family dojo, practicing throws, holds, and the mental discipline that separated true martial artists from mere fighters. By the age of 12, Keiko had already earned her black belt, an achievement that typically took most students 6 to 8 years to accomplish. Her sensei, Master Tanaka, had been amazed by her natural ability to read an opponent's intentions, her uncanny sense of timing, and her absolute commitment to perfection in every technique. She could execute a perfect ippon seoi nage, a shoulder throw that could send the opponent flying through the air, with such fluid grace that it looked more like dancing than fighting. Her groundwork was equally impressive, with submission holds that could make grown men tap out within seconds of being applied. What made Keiko truly exceptional wasn't just her technical skill, but her mental approach to the art. She had internalized the fundamental principles of judo so completely that they had become part of her very being. Ju, meaning gentle or yielding, and do, meaning way or path, represented more than just physical techniques to her. They were a philosophy of life that emphasized respect, humility, and the importance of using minimum effort to achieve maximum efficiency. This was why she never boasted about her abilities, never sought to intimidate others with displays of strength, and why she carried herself with such quiet dignity even in the face of adversity. Her competition record was equally impressive, though she kept it secret from her new classmates. 3-time state champion in California, 2nd place at nationals in her age division, and she had been training with the Junior Olympic Development Team before the family's move to Colorado. The walls of her bedroom were lined with medals and trophies that told the story of countless victories, but she kept her blinds drawn tight, ensuring that no curious neighbor or visiting classmate would accidentally discover her hidden achievements. The decision to keep her martial arts background secret had been a conscious choice, made in consultation with her parents after some difficult experiences at her previous school. When word had gotten out about her competitive success, she had found herself either feared or fetishized, some students afraid to interact with her normally, others constantly challenging her to prove herself or asking her to demonstrate techniques like she was some kind of performing animal. The attention had been exhausting and isolating in its own way, making genuine friendships nearly impossible to form. So when the family moved to Colorado, Keiko had made a pact with herself to try blending in, to see if she could experience normal teenage life without the complications that came with being known as the girl who could break someone's arm if she wanted to. The foundation of Keiko's extraordinary abilities traced back to a philosophy that ran deeper than mere physical training, rooted in centuries of Japanese tradition and refined through the wisdom of 3 generations of martial artists. Her grandfather's dojo in San Francisco hadn't just been a place of physical training, it had been a sanctuary where ancient principles merged with modern application, where children learned not just how to throw and grapple, but how to carry themselves through life with dignity and purpose. Master Hiroshi Nakamura had been more than just Keiko's grandfather. He had been her first and most influential sensei, a man whose weathered hands could demonstrate techniques with such precision that they seemed to defy the laws of physics. During her childhood visits to his dojo, she would sit in perfect seiza position for hours, listening to him explain the deeper meanings behind each movement. "Judo is not about winning or losing, Keiko-chan," he would say in his accented English, his voice carrying the weight of decades of experience. "It is about understanding the nature of balance itself, how to find it within yourself, how to disrupt it in others, and how to restore harmony when conflict is finished." These lessons had shaped not just her fighting style, but her entire approach to navigating the world. When faced with aggression, her first instinct wasn't to meet force with force, but to redirect that energy, to find the path of least resistance that would neutralize the threat while preserving everyone's dignity. This principle, known as Juno-ri, the principle of gentleness, had been drilled into her consciousness until it became as natural as breathing. She understood that true strength came not from the ability to dominate others, but from the wisdom to know when and how to apply one's skills appropriately. Her training regimen had been intense from the very beginning, but never in a way that felt punitive or harsh. 3 hours every afternoon at the dojo, working through kata with meditative focus, practicing randori with partners of all sizes and skill levels, conditioning her body through exercises that built not just strength, but also flexibility, timing, and spatial awareness. Her grandfather had insisted on traditional training methods that many modern dojos had abandoned. Hours spent perfecting the art of ukemi, the ability to fall safely and recover instantly until hitting the mat became as natural as walking. The mental discipline had been equally rigorous. Before each training session, she would spend 15 minutes in mokuso, a form of seated meditation that cleared her mind of distractions and centered her focus on the present moment. Her grandfather had taught her to visualize techniques in perfect detail, to rehearse throws and combinations in her mind until they became automatic responses rather than conscious decisions. This mental training had developed in her an almost supernatural ability to read body language, to sense an opponent's intentions before they themselves were fully aware of them. What made her training truly unique was the emphasis on zanshin, the state of relaxed alertness that allowed a martial artist to remain completely aware of their surroundings while appearing completely at ease. This quality had become so natural to her that she carried it into every aspect of her daily life, observing everything while seeming to notice nothing. At Westfield High, this translated into an almost uncanny awareness of the social dynamics around her, the ability to sense brewing conflicts and shifting alliances long before they became obvious to others. Her parents had supported this intensive training not because they wanted to create a fighter, but because they understood the character-building aspects of traditional martial arts. The discipline, respect, and self-control that came with serious judo training were values they wanted their daughter to carry throughout her life, regardless of whether she ever needed to use her physical skills in actual conflict. The trouble at Westfield High began with Madison Sinclair, a girl whose beauty was as sharp and dangerous as broken glass. At 18, Madison ruled the school's social hierarchy with the kind of ruthless efficiency that would have impressed medieval royalty. Her platinum blonde hair fell in perfect waves past her shoulders. Her makeup was always flawless, despite the early morning hours, and her wardrobe consisted entirely of designer pieces that cost more than most families spent on groceries in a month. She had the kind of confidence that came from never experiencing real consequences for her actions, protected by parents who donated generously to the school and a social circle that enabled her worst impulses. Madison's inner circle consisted of her two constant companions, Brittany Chen, whose family's tech fortune had brought her way into Madison's good graces, and Skylar Rodriguez, a wannabe influencer whose Instagram followers hung on every carefully curated post about their glamorous teenage lives. Together, they formed a trinity of teenage cruelty that had perfected the art of psychological warfare, capable of destroying someone's social standing with nothing more than a well-timed laugh or a strategically placed rumor. From the moment Keiko had walked through the doors of Westfield High, Madison had identified her as a threat to the carefully maintained social order. It wasn't that Keiko was trying to compete for attention or social status, quite the opposite, but there was something about the new girl's quiet dignity, her refusal to seek approval or validation from the popular crowd, that Madison found deeply threatening. Worse still, Madison had noticed the way some of the boys looked at Keiko when they thought no one was watching, drawn to her understated beauty and mysterious aura in a way that made Madison's more obvious charms seem somehow cheap and manufactured. The campaign of harassment had started subtly, as these things always did. Madison would make sure to slam her locker just a little too hard when Keiko was walking past, causing her to flinch. In the cafeteria, Madison's table would erupt in loud laughter whenever Keiko entered their field of vision, accompanied by pointed stares and whispered comments that were just quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability, but loud enough for their target to hear fragments of cutting remarks about her appearance, her clothes, her obvious outsider status. The psychological assault escalated gradually over the weeks. Madison discovered that Keiko brought lunch from home, beautifully prepared bento boxes that her mother made each morning, and turned this into ammunition for mockery. "Look at the weird foreign food," she would announce to anyone within earshot, wrinkling her nose in exaggerated disgust. "Doesn't she know they sell normal food in the cafeteria?" The comments were designed to make Keiko feel ashamed of her heritage, to internalize the message that her culture and traditions were somehow inferior to the bland conformity that Madison represented. The attacks became more personal and targeted, as Madison realized that Keiko wasn't going to respond in ways that provided immediate satisfaction. Traditional bullying tactics, like public humiliation or social exclusion, seemed to bounce off Keiko like water off a duck's back, which only frustrated Madison further. She began spreading rumors about Keiko's family, suggesting that they were probably here illegally, that her mother had only gotten her job at the hospital through some kind of affirmative action program rather than merit, that the family was too poor to afford proper American clothes. Brittany and Skylar proved to be eager accomplices in this escalating campaign of cruelty. They would accidentally spill drinks near Keiko's seat in classes, forcing her to scramble to protect her books and assignments. They would knock her books out of her arms in the hallway, then offer false apologies that dripped with sarcasm. They would exclude her from group projects in ways that seemed accidental but were clearly coordinated, leaving her to complete assignments alone while spreading whispers about how she was probably too weird and antisocial to work with anyway. The breaking point arrived on a crisp Friday afternoon in November, when the autumn air carried the promise of winter and the hallways of Westfield High buzzed with the anticipation of weekend freedom. Keiko had been looking forward to this particular day for weeks, not because of any social plans or teenage festivities, but because she was finally going to participate in her first extracurricular activity since transferring to the school. The art club was hosting their annual showcase preparation meeting, and Keiko had been working on a series of watercolor paintings that depicted the changing seasons through the lens of traditional Japanese aesthetics. Her backpack that day contained more than just textbooks and homework. Carefully wrapped in protective plastic sleeves were 6 months' worth of artistic work, delicate paintings that represented her attempt to bridge the gap between her cultural heritage and her new American environment. Each piece had taken hours to complete, painted in the quiet solitude of her bedroom while she listened to the sounds of her new neighborhood settling into evening routines. The paintings were her secret project, her way of processing the complex emotions that came with displacement and the constant struggle to find her place in an unwelcoming social landscape. Madison had been watching Keiko more intently than usual. That week, her predatory instincts sharpened by frustration at her target's continued resilience. Every attempt to break Keiko's composure had failed spectacularly, and Madison's reputation as the undisputed queen of Westfield High was beginning to feel threatened by this quiet girl who refused to acknowledge her power. The sight of Keiko carrying what appeared to be a different, more carefully organized backpack had caught Madison's attention immediately, triggering her instinct to investigate anything that might provide new ammunition for her psychological warfare. The confrontation began in the main hallway during the transition period between 6th and 7th periods, when the corridors were packed with students rushing to beat the bell. Keiko was walking toward the art wing, her steps lighter than usual with anticipation for the showcase meeting, when Madison deliberately positioned herself directly in her path. The collision was orchestrated to appear accidental, but the force with which Madison slammed into Keiko was anything but unintentional. "Oh my God, watch where you're going!" Madison shrieked, her voice pitched perfectly to carry over the ambient noise and draw maximum attention from passing students. "You just completely ran into me. Are you blind or just stupid?" Her performance was flawless, the injured party demanding justice from an obvious perpetrator, and within seconds, a crowd had begun to form, phones already emerging from pockets, as students sensed the possibility of viral-worthy drama. Keiko steadied herself against the lockers, her backpack having taken the brunt of the impact, but still secured safely on her shoulders. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her voice carrying the same measured calm that had frustrated Madison for months. "I didn't see you there." Her apology was genuine, despite knowing that the collision had been entirely deliberate, because her grandfather had taught her that taking responsibility for conflict was often the fastest path to resolution. But Madison wasn't interested in resolution. She was interested in complete and total humiliation, and Keiko's continued composure only fueled her rage. "Sorry isn't good enough," Madison snarled, stepping closer until she was invading Keiko's personal space in a way that felt threatening and aggressive. "You people need to learn some basic respect for others. Maybe if you spent less time being weird and antisocial, you'd actually notice other human beings around you." The crowd was growing larger, forming a loose circle around the confrontation as more students abandoned their journey to class in favor of witnessing what promised to be an epic takedown. Brittany and Skylar had materialized at Madison's sides, like loyal lieutenants, their expressions mixing excitement with malicious anticipation. Someone in the crowd was already live-streaming the encounter, adding a layer of permanent documentation that would make whatever happened next impossible to take back or explain away. What happened next would be seared into the memory of every witness, a moment of casual cruelty that crossed every line of human decency. Madison's eyes had locked onto Keiko's backpack with the focused intensity of a predator spotting weakness in its prey. There was something different about this bag, something that suggested it contained items of particular value or importance to its owner. The way Keiko had been carrying it, slightly protective, slightly more careful than usual, had triggered Madison's instinct for maximum psychological damage. "What's in the bag anyway?" Madison demanded, her voice taking on a mock-curious tone that fooled no one. "More weird foreign stuff? Strange food that smells up the whole hallway?" She reached out suddenly, her manicured fingers grasping at the backpack's main zipper before Keiko could react. The movement was swift and aggressive, designed to catch her target off guard and maximize the element of surprise. Keiko stepped backward instinctively, her hands moving to protect her belongings. But Madison's attack had been coordinated with military precision. Brittany grabbed Keiko's left arm, while Skylar seized her right, holding her in place, while Madison began yanking at the backpack with increasing violence. The fabric strained against the assault, seams stretching beyond their design limits, as Madison pulled with all her strength, her face twisted with an expression of pure malicious joy. "Let me see what the little weirdo keeps in here," Madison grunted, her voice strained with effort as she fought against the backpack's construction and Keiko's desperate attempts to maintain her grip. The crowd around them had grown larger and more vocal, some students calling out encouragement to Madison, while others watched in horrified fascination at the escalating violence of the attack. The sound of ripping fabric cut through the hallway noise like a knife through silk. Madison's violent tugging had found the weak point in the backpack's construction, and with a sickening tearing sound, the main compartment split wide open. The contents exploded outward in a cascade of destruction, textbooks hitting the floor, with heavy thuds, pens and pencils scattering like dropped marbles. And most devastating of all, Keiko's carefully protected artwork floating down like wounded butterflies. The watercolor paintings, each one a masterpiece of patience and cultural expression, fluttered through the air before landing on the dirty hallway floor. Students immediately began stepping on them, either accidentally or with deliberate malice, grinding months of careful work under their sneakers. The protective plastic sleeves had been torn away in the explosion, leaving the delicate paper vulnerable to every scuff mark, every footprint, every careless movement of the growing crowd. Madison stood triumphant in the center of the chaos, holding the destroyed backpack above her head like a trophy. The main compartment hung in tatters, the zippers broken, the shoulder straps partially detached from their anchor points. What had been a functional, carefully organized container for Keiko's academic and artistic life was now nothing more than fabric scraps and twisted metal hardware. "Oops," Madison said, with theatrical innocence, her voice carrying clearly over the excited murmur of the crowd. "Looks like your cheap bag couldn't handle normal use. Maybe you should ask your parents to buy you something that isn't from the dollar store." She tossed the ruined backpack at Keiko's feet, the remaining fabric landing in a heap among the scattered artwork and trampled school supplies. Keiko knelt slowly among the destruction, her hands trembling as she tried to salvage what remained. Of her paintings, the watercolors had been transformed from delicate artistic expressions into smeared, dirty fragments bearing the imprint of dozens of shoes. 6 months of work, hundreds of hours of careful brushstrokes, cultural bridges built one pigment at a time, all of it destroyed in 30 seconds of mindless cruelty. The crowd was laughing now, phones capturing every moment of her humiliation for later sharing on social media platforms. Some students were taking pictures of the ruined artwork, already composing captions that would turn her personal tragedy into entertainment for their followers. That night, Keiko sat in her bedroom surrounded by the remnants of her destroyed artwork, carefully attempting to salvage what little remained intact from Madison's assault. Her hands moved with steady precision as she sorted through the damaged paintings, but inside, something fundamental had shifted. The quiet acceptance that had guided her through months of harassment had crystallized into something harder, more focused. She wasn't angry in the explosive, destructive way that Madison operated. Instead, she felt the cold, calculated clarity that her grandfather had taught her to recognize as the moment when action became necessary. The ruined backpack lay crumpled in her wastebasket, its torn fabric a testament to the deliberate cruelty she had endured. But more than the material loss, it was the laughter that echoed in her memory. the sound of dozens of students finding entertainment in her humiliation, the casual way they had stepped on her artwork without a second thought, the complete absence of empathy or basic human decency in their response to witnessing someone else's pain. Keiko opened her closet and pushed aside the oversized sweaters and loose-fitting clothes that had served as her camouflage for the past months. Her fingers found the black G that hung in the back, still crisp and perfectly pressed despite months of storage. The fabric felt familiar under her touch, like greeting an old friend after a long separation. Beside it hung her obi, the thick black belt that represented years of dedication and countless hours of training, its worn edges a testament to the journey that had brought her to this moment of decision. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Master Tanaka's number. Her former sensei in San Francisco had made her promise to call if she ever needed guidance, and tonight she needed the wisdom that came from someone who understood both the power she possessed and the responsibility that came with it. The conversation was brief but illuminating. Master Tanaka listened to her account of the day's events without interruption, then spoke in the measured tones she remembered so well. "Keiko-san," he said, his voice carrying across the distance with the authority of decades of experience, "you have shown great restraint and honor in your conduct. But there comes a time when allowing others to act without consequences becomes its own form of harm. Harm to yourself, harm to other potential victims, and ultimately harm to those who believe they can act without facing the natural results of their choices." The next morning, Keiko's transformation was subtle but unmistakable to anyone who knew how to look. She had exchanged her usual oversized hoodie for a fitted black athletic top that hinted at the lean muscle underneath. Her loose jeans were replaced by athletic pants that allowed for unrestricted movement. Most significantly, her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail that revealed the full intensity of her dark eyes, no longer hidden behind the curtain of carefully arranged strands. She moved through the hallways of Westfield High with a different energy entirely, not the careful invisibility she had cultivated for months, but the relaxed alertness of someone completely aware of their capabilities and prepared to use them, if necessary. Students who had grown accustomed to her submissive posture found themselves doing double takes as she passed, sensing something different, but unable to articulate exactly what had changed. The new backpack on her shoulders was smaller, more functional, a sleek design that suggested someone who valued efficiency over storage capacity. But what no one could see were the modifications she had made the night before, the careful placement of weight that turned an ordinary school bag into a perfectly balanced training tool, should the need arise. Madison noticed the change immediately, her predatory instincts fine-tuned to detect any shift in her victim's behavior patterns. The sight of Keiko walking with confidence instead of submission triggered an immediate response. This was a challenge that could not go unanswered, a potential threat to the social order that Madison had worked so hard to establish and maintain. The confrontation came during lunch period on Monday, when the cafeteria was packed with students and the noise level provided perfect cover for what Madison had planned as the final humiliation of Keiko Nakamura. Madison had spent the weekend stewing over Keiko's transformed appearance, interpreting the change in posture and clothing as a direct challenge to her authority. The idea that her victim might be developing confidence, or worse, fighting back, was intolerable to someone whose entire identity was built on the systematic destruction of others' self-worth. Madison approached Keiko's usual table in the far corner of the cafeteria, flanked as always by Brittany and Skylar, but this time she had recruited additional muscle in the form of Derek Walsh, a linebacker from the football team who owed Madison a favor after she had helped him cheat on his SATs. Derek stood 6'4" and weighed nearly 250 pounds, his presence designed to intimidate through sheer physical mass and the implicit threat of violence that came with his reputation for aggressive behavior, both on and off the field. "Well, well," Madison announced loudly enough to draw attention from surrounding tables. "Looks like our little foreign exchange student decided to play dress-up today. New clothes, new attitude. What's next, Keiko? Are you going to start thinking you actually belong here with normal people?" Keiko continued eating her lunch with deliberate calm, not acknowledging Madison's presence or the growing audience of students who had turned to watch the unfolding drama. Her chopsticks moved with practiced precision as she selected pieces of rice and vegetables from her bento box, each movement economical and controlled. The apparent indifference to Madison's provocation only served to escalate the situation, as Madison interpreted silence as defiance rather than wisdom. "I'm talking to you!" Madison shrieked, slamming her hand down on the table hard enough to make Keiko's water bottle jump. "You think you can ignore me? You think changing your outfit makes you tough? Let me remind you what happens to people who don't know their place at this school." She gestured to Derek, who stepped forward with the practiced swagger of someone accustomed to using his size to solve problems through intimidation. Derek reached across the table and grabbed Keiko's lunchbox, lifting it high above his head, with a grin that revealed his intention to dump the contents over her head. The cafeteria had grown noticeably quieter as more students became aware of the escalating confrontation, phones emerging from pockets as the possibility of viral content became apparent. Some students looked uncomfortable with the obvious bullying, but none made any move to intervene or seek help from the supervising teachers who were conveniently absent from their posts. What happened next unfolded with such speed and precision that most witnesses would later struggle to describe the exact sequence of events. Derek's arm was extended above his head, the lunchbox poised to dump its contents when Keiko moved. Her right hand shot out with cobra-like quickness, grasping Derek's wrist in what appeared to be a simple grab, but was actually a complex joint manipulation technique called kotegaishi. The movement was so subtle that most observers missed it entirely, but Derek's expression of confident aggression instantly transformed into one of confused pain. Keiko rose from her seat with fluid grace, maintaining her grip on Derek's wrist while stepping to his side in a movement that looked almost like dancing. Her left hand joined her right in a precise grip that turned Derek's own strength against him, the leverage forcing him to bend forward to avoid having his wrist snapped. The lunchbox fell harmlessly to the table as Derek found himself completely controlled by someone less than half his size. "Put me down," Derek grunted, struggling against the hold, but finding that every attempt to break free only increased the pressure on his wrist and forearm. His face flushed red with embarrassment as he realized that his superior size and strength were completely useless against the technique that held him captive. Keiko's voice, when she finally spoke, carried clearly across the now silent cafeteria, with the calm authority of someone completely in control of the situation. "Derek," Keiko said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of calm authority that made everyone in the cafeteria lean forward to hear, "you're going to sit down now, and you're going to apologize for trying to dump food on me, not because I'm making you, but because it's the right thing to do." She released the wrist control with a subtle adjustment that demonstrated complete mastery over the situation, allowing Derek to straighten up while maintaining enough leverage to instantly reapply the technique if necessary. Derek rubbed his wrist, his face cycling through confusion, embarrassment, and grudging respect as he looked at this small girl who had just effortlessly neutralized his physical advantage. The cafeteria remained eerily quiet, hundreds of students frozen in place as they witnessed something that defied every assumption they had made about power dynamics and social hierarchies. I'm sorry," Derek mumbled, his voice barely audible. as he took a step backward. That was messed up. Madison's face had gone pale, then flushed deep red as she realized that her carefully orchestrated moment of triumph had turned into her own public humiliation. "This isn't over," she snarled, but her voice lacked its usual commanding tone, replaced by the shrill desperation of someone whose carefully constructed world was crumbling around her. "You think you're so special? You think one lucky move makes you tough?" Keiko turned her attention to Madison with the same serene composure she had shown Derek, but there was something in her eyes now that made even the most confident students take an involuntary step backward. "Madison," she said, her voice still quiet but carrying an undertone of steel that commanded absolute attention, "for months you've made my life miserable because you thought I was weak. You destroyed my artwork, my belongings, and tried to destroy my spirit because you believed I couldn't fight back." She took a single step toward Madison, and the movement was so perfectly controlled, so filled with contained power, that Madison instinctively moved backward until she bumped against the cafeteria table behind her. "But you were wrong about everything. I'm not weak. I've been choosing to be gentle. I'm not helpless. I've been choosing to show restraint, and I'm not afraid of you. I've been choosing to give you chances to be better than this." The entire cafeteria was recording now, dozens of phones capturing every word, as Keiko continued with the kind of moral authority that left no room for argument. "You want to know what real strength looks like? It's not destroying other people's belongings or humiliating them in front of crowds. Real strength is having the power to hurt someone and choosing not to use it. Real strength is standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves." Madison opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time in her high school career, she found herself completely outmatched, not by superior cruelty or social manipulation, but by someone who operated from a completely different moral framework that rendered her usual tactics powerless. "From me now on," Keiko continued, her gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd of students, "the bullying stops, not just toward me, but toward everyone. Because now you know that there are consequences for treating people like they're disposable. You know that someone is watching, someone is ready to stand up, and someone has both the ability and the willingness to make sure that cruelty doesn't go unanswered." She turned back to Madison one final time. "You have a choice to make. You can keep trying to build yourself up by tearing other people down and discover just how limited your power really is when faced with someone who won't be intimidated. Or you can use this as an opportunity to become the kind of person others respect rather than fear." The transformation at Westfield High didn't happen overnight, but it was undeniable. Students who had been targets of Madison's cruelty found their voices, emboldened by seeing that bullies could be stopped. Teachers began paying closer attention to the social dynamics in their classrooms. And Madison herself, stripped of the fear-based power she had wielded for so long, was forced to confront the reality of who she had become and whether she wanted to remain that person. Keiko returned to her quiet ways, but now her silence came from choice rather than fear. She had proven that true strength wasn't about domination. It was about protection, justice, and the wisdom to know when gentle force was necessary to restore balance. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't won through violence, but through showing others that their actions have consequences and that every person deserves to be treated with basic human dignity. What did you think of Keiko's incredible transformation? Have you ever witnessed or experienced bullying that crossed the line? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories of ordinary people discovering their extraordinary strength when they need it most. Hit that notification bell so you never miss these inspiring tales of justice and redemption.